From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. The two sessions, China's annual key political event, was all about sending a positive and reassuring message to the doomsayers and to the world. China is on track to achieve high-quality development, it says, and release new quality productive forces to spur its growth. Will it be enough, though, to allay fears in the European Union, China's biggest trading partner after the US? How can China and the EU find the middle course and veer toward a more balanced and mutually beneficial approach? Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Adam Dunnett. He's the Secretary General of the European Chamber of Commerce in China. Adam, welcome to CGTN. We've just had the Chinese political season known as the two sessions. We've heard from the Chinese premier saying the Chinese economy will grow around 5% in the year 2024. A whole host of measures trying to help doing business in China easier for foreign companies. You're representing the European Chamber of Commerce in China. Anything from this year's two sessions that's sticking out to you?
Well, from a business investment perspective, there was a section particularly on foreign investment, and the first opening part of that session talked about increased market access in the areas of telecommunications and in healthcare. So that immediately caught our eye. There was no further explanation of that, but we expect relevant policies to be coming forward in the future. So that was the most immediate one. But in that whole area, there was general talk about increased market opening and attraction of foreign investment, something that obviously we encourage as well as a European chamber operating here in China.
How do policies in China transpire into benefits for foreign companies? I mean, usually there is this CITPP, the Chinese, the trade facilitation body that is associated with the Chinese government, that, as far as I understand, get in touch with foreign companies in China and then help interpret and facilitate policy implementation. What do you expect to happen next?
The Lianghui is extremely important because it sets out a broad framework for the year ahead, but it also builds upon a number of policies and meetings that have taken place previously. Obviously, stability is the core focus. Through stability, we will see progress, as the report said. But what businesses need here is they need transparency and predictability. And so for a lot of the objectives of the work report itself, we saw areas where it did speak about reform and opening up, but we also saw areas that spoke about self-reliance. And so to be very clear here, my view of this is in some areas China will continue to open up and reform, but in some areas it wants to have its own domestic industry, it wants to have self-reliance. And so what's extremely important is for us now to go a step further and to try and understand what is meant by these broad directions and how it will affect different sectors accordingly. And then particularly in the area of digitalization, I need to stress that this is the future. And for us, what's really important is understanding what China's security related legislation, how that's going to be implemented. So the definition of important data, for example, how data can be shared globally with its headquarters through cross-border data transfer arrangements. All of these things need to be recognized, and they need to be spelled out more clearly for businesses to take advantage and to better understand the intentions of the work report this year.
Right. Adam, in 2023, the European Union prioritized a so-called risk mitigation approach towards China. We've heard about it once and often. Despite this, China-Europe freight trains exceeded 85,000 trips in the year 2023. If you look at German direct investment in China set a record at 11.9 billion euros in the year 23, growing by about 4%. What do you make of all this at the background of the noises that says China is not investable, foreign companies are pulling out?
Okay, there's a lot in there. First, on risk mitigation, you're right. European Commission President von der Leyen last year was had a famous speech on de-risking, and indeed, globally speaking, many countries are increasingly concerned about economic security. But I think it's extremely important to understand how this is being played out in various economies. So in the EU, the term that was coined by the EU is indeed de-risking. De-risking here doesn't mean decoupling. It doesn't mean anything towards China specifically. The way the EU has explained it is to take a country agnostic approach in a very refined and detailed way to look at areas where there are potential risks to its economy to ensure that its supply chains can remain resilient. And when I say country agnostic, let me give you an example. In the area of critical raw materials, for example, they have a new policy in place which says that no more than 65% of specifically identified critical raw materials should come from any single one country. And so in this case, it's not about domestic development internally. It's not about excluding any specific country per se, but it's about ensuring diversity and access to these materials. Again, the EU approach is very much focused on diversification. The approach that we've seen in the US is more targeted towards China, and then China's response has been about developing its own capacity internally, domestically, which has been the case for a long time already. So very, very important to understand that going forward.
Right, Adam, what key measures do you think should be optimized further for foreign companies? And then do you see opportunities or synergy between Chinese companies and European companies going forward?
It's a new term, but actually I don't think it's a big change from China's previous goals of trying to further move up the value chain and improve productivity and bring in advanced technology. China has made tremendous gains in the last few decades and is a very innovative environment. So European companies do want to be here. They want to innovate alongside their Chinese counterparts. They've got technology that they can bring. They can also learn from their competitors and their partners here. But in order for this policy to be successful, I think it's important to understand you can't just demand technology gains. You can't just write it into a policy and expect it to happen 12 months later. You need to create the environment, the soft environment in which companies and individual entrepreneurs are willing to take the risk, knowing that the risk that they take in the financial input they put into such investments has a return, has a market, has IPR, intellectual property rights that will be protected, and is able to do so in an environment that's a fair environment. That doesn't mean that subsidies need to be ruled out completely. Subsidies are there to help innovation, but they need to be understood and they need to be applied equally and selectively as well. Getting that right balance is very, very challenging. And again, for companies and individuals, it's about creating that environment for them.
Right, and then Adam, I want to get your stance about the Chinese economy, the 5% growth target. There has been so many theories going around that says China peak or the China model is running out of steam. Do you see 5% as a realistic target, and do you see that happening in the year 2024?
Well, China's always been able to deliver on its, almost always been able to deliver on its stated targets. And last year was a surprising 5.2%. This year is going to be very challenging. Last year, we were all amazed with the quick rebound that China had in January and in February after it released its COVID measures, and production got going almost immediately. But what the surprise is that the demand wasn't there. And that's been a featured element of the concerns about 2024 as well, is both domestic and global demand just isn't there. And so we've faced this situation where we've got overcapacity in a lot of sectors, and we've got a real mismatch between supply and demand. China is also facing, obviously, a huge demographic challenge right now with an aging population, youth unemployment with 12 million graduates graduating this year, and you've got a restructuring of the industry here. We're moving into a lot of new industries, a lot of old industries are being replaced now, and making that transition, as needed as it is not easy. And so we need to make sure that we've got the right policies in place to elevate and to encourage consumption, because savings rates are very high because people are uncertain about the future, but also providing market opportunities for business so that they make the right changes that the economy needs, and again, that they're incentivized to do so with a market that's there that will reward them.
Right. Then in the year 2024, what new opportunities do you see for the European Chamber and the companies that your organization represent? And what are the key challenges? Previously, you talked about IT and then a few sectors that is potentially opening up to foreign companies. What sectors and areas do you see as more promising?
Well, I just mentioned the aging population. So there's so much that can be done there with China's healthy 2030 agenda. Many European pharmaceuticals and medical device manufacturers and healthcare providers are willing to play their role and make contributions to the development of these sectors and needs here in China. I think there's good opportunities for them there. As I mentioned, this is one of the areas where China said it would loosen some of its market access constraints. I think anything related to the environment and China's 2030 and 2060 decarbonization goals, its 1+N strategy is something that needs to be rolled out. And there's many companies here that want to make investments in green energy, but they need to know what the policies are going to be at a national level, at a local level, and a sectoral level. So a guide map for how China is going to get to that 2030 peak period and that 2060 neutrality goal is needed. And I think one of the more immediate issues that we're seeing is European companies here. They've got to comply with both Chinese regulation and EU regulations. And so in the EU, we've seen the development of the EU's Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. That's going to come into play very, very soon. And companies here are going to be responsible for their supply chain up and down the ladder, going to China, going back to Europe. And for them, being able to have access to green supply chains, access to green power, green electricity is extremely important. So many of our members, many of the meetings that we're having now, we're meeting with officials at a local level, and we're pleading with them to make more investments into green energy, to allow us to do so, and to allow us to have access to the grid so that we can be compliant both with our goals and requirements here in China and back in the EU. And what I say here actually applies very much to Chinese companies as well. We're all looking to go green, and so we need to work together on making that happen.
Right, Adam, finally, considering the fact that the China-US strategic rivalry is not going away, is not dying down anytime soon, do you expect closer coordination and a greater potential between China and the European Union in general going forward?
The de-risking approach that the EU has is very different from the US. Obviously, we all need to work together, and countries will respond to what different countries do in terms of opening their markets and closing their markets. We've seen that between China and the US is tit for tat for protectionism. This isn't the way we want to go. We've seen good cooperation on environmental issues, both amongst all three economies that you just mentioned. Last year, we saw an agreement signed on AI, on artificial intelligence. This is extremely important going forward between the US, the EU, and China. So that's a very positive signal that we can work together. Overall, our trading relationship, all three economies, is our first and second largest partners. So it's extremely important, and I think we shouldn't lose sight of the overall benefits that those trade investment relationships have for each other. We would like to see more European companies investing here, and we'd like to see more Chinese companies investing in Europe as well.
Adam Dunnett, the Secretary General of the European Chamber of Commerce in China, thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.